Hello and welcome to KhaleejTimes.com. Today, my guest is someone who has captured popular imagination as Logan Roy in the hugely popular series Succession. Apart from Logan Roy, Brian Cox has left indelible mark on the big screen as King Agamemnon in Troy, as Winston Churchill in the eponymous film, and he was the first actor to play Dr. Hannibal Lecter on the big screen. Come February, and Brian Cox will be in town to speak at the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature. We caught up with him to talk about his enormous body of work in films and theatre and why it's important to speak your truth in the time of cancel culture. Brian, glad to have you with us today.
Nice to be with you.
Your, I was going through your book. It begins with an interesting it begins with an interesting prologue. And one of the statements that actually stood out was how actors are inherently insecure. It's not something that one sees actors being very candid about, admitting to or observing that a fellow actor can be insecure. And of course, you have gone to immense lengths to explain that in the book, but I just need you to break it down for our viewers. Uh, what makes actors as talented as Laurence Olivier, who you mentioned during the shooting of Lear, what makes them insecure?
Well, I think it's because it's such a nebulous profession. There are no guarantees. You know, in a way, I think it's the healthiest aspect of being an actor. I I don't look upon insecurity as really a negative. I look upon it as being a positive because it keeps you in a sense of, uh, you're in a sense of readiness. You know, and I think that's just the nature of the beast. In most careers, people have a job and they work at it for 30 years and then they retire and they go on and they've got, apart from financial crises or what have you, they usually know they're going to be doing that for their lives. Well, we inhabit so many lives over so many different periods and so many different styles. I mean, you just mentioned Churchill, Goering, Hannibal Lecter, Logan Roy. I mean, these are all great figures one portrays and one has been very privileged to portray. But also it's inherent that the very nature of that is you don't know where you're going next. So where am I going next? When I finish that, what do I do next? And I always I try and healthily look at everything as a stop on the way. I never look at it as a stop in itself. So like Logan is not the be all, even though it's brought me huge personal success. It's not the be all and end all of my career. It's a part of it. And it's part of the insecurity of my career. The fact that we do it for a short time or what have you. And we don't know how long we're going to be doing the show, but it's very successful. But you're always feeling that sense of, because it's built into your DNA almost by now, that you are ready to move on at any given point. So therefore, you're not secure because it isn't a secure profession and it never has been. And that's part of its strength, is its lack of security. Does that explain it all right for you?
Yes, because it's very refreshing for a legendary actor like you to explain and break it down for an audience. But have you ever consciously tried to resist that insecurity as an actor?
No, not really. I mean, you get securities from the people around you, from your loved ones. That's your family. And I just feel I've been very blessed, and I don't really feel, I just feel that this is something I live with, insecurity. It's like a neighbor. There's my neighbor insecurity, and they're over there and they're still working away, keeping me on my toes. And that's the other thing about insecurity is it keeps you fresh. It keeps you don't get too comfortable, and I mean, and of course, because of my background in the book, which you referred to, putting the rabbit in the hat, because I had such an apparently insecure childhood because of going from really being very kind of lower middle class, reasonably well off, to after my father died, my mother had a series of breakdowns, to a level of poverty, which was not good. But I never ever felt, I just felt, oh, I don't know. I've lived with it all my life, so I'm used to it. It's like it's like a cousin.
There was something very interesting in the book when you joined Dundee Rep, and you see a world of possibility opening up for you. And then, of course, you later talk about how moving to America afforded you a social mobility. I just want to connect the two things. They may not be connected at all, but still, did theater at that time present when you were just a teen and you had joined Dundee initially? Did you feel that this is something that could change your fortune, not only in terms of what you could do, but also in terms of, rising the social ladder in any which way?
Yeah, I think one has to kind of be. I would be nervous about rising the social ladder. I come from a country where we have the expression "Jock Tamson's bairns," which means that we're all the same. I mean, my country is very sort of socialist minded in that way. I'm talking about being a Scot, and I think that level of insecurity that the theatre for me, when I went into the theatre, it was like I'd found my family. I'd found the family that I was going to be living with for the next, well, I started when I was 15, so it's the next 60 years. And I still feel that. I still feel it's my family. I still feel that the theatre and actors, we are all part of the same thing. We are, thespians, we are a group, and in a way, we're so insecure in ourselves that keeps us fresh, it's because we have fellow insecurities, fellow insecuritants, if you could call such a word. So that's never really bothered me. And my period of social mobility, the great period of social mobility for me, was in the 1960s, when everything was possible. I mean, my mother was a widow. I had no real education qualifications. My education was a disaster. Even though now I have 5 PhDs from various universities, I never made it. I didn't do it. That was not my interest. So I felt that, that's just been my motivating force, And in the 60s, I was accepted and people don't understand what that period was like, because we lived through the war, and then we had, in this country, we had a terrible, a Tory government to rival the terrible Tory government we have now in the UK. But so one lived through that. But then in the end of really it was started through John Osborne's Look Back in Anger, when suddenly the whole premise of the culture changed, because Britain being so class-ridden and so feudal in many ways, everybody was kept in their place. You're there, you're there. But in that period, for that period of time, with the rise of actors like Albert Finney, Alan Bates, Peter O'Toole, Tom Courtenay, there was a great sense of moving on to something quite different. And I was this kid from Dundee. I'd worked in the theatre. But when I went to London, when I went to study in London and learn my craft, I was immediately, as I had been in the theatre, immediately welcomed. So I knew, socially I was welcomed. It was fine for me. Just in terms of, people were very warm towards wanting me to be successful. And I really owe a lot to that period of absolutely feeling quite. But unfortunately, it's closed down now. And I I did a thing in Dundee the other night, my hometown, for a paper thing. It was a big meeting of people. And somebody asked me the question, about how do working class people get into the theatre now? Now, that was never a problem for me. I was welcome. But it's become so much more about, and I have nothing against the Benedict Cumberbatches and the Eddie Redmaynes. They're all wonderful actors, the Dominic West. But they grew up in an environment where the theatre, you know, they went to schools where theatre was a very important thing, and the money was spent. But there's a whole class of people who cannot cross that bridge anymore. And for me, it was a clear path. I was welcomed, and I was able to start my career. And, you know, for a fairly inarticulate kid from Dundee to learn to become a major classical actor is such an incredible journey. But I was empowered by the people around me, and particularly, and that's what's great about the theatre. When I walked into the theatre, we're all the same. We're a family, and we're a very social family in that way. And there's nothing like it. I mean, I have such love and respect for my fellow actors, and that goes right down to the wonderful cast that I work with on Succession.
Speaking of Peter O'Toole, there are many passages in the book where you talk about actually meeting your idols. Did encountering them as co-actors shake the pedestal you had put them on? Did they become more real to you?
No, not at all. I mean, there were sort of, a lot of those guys were pretty wild, and particularly Peter. But by the time I met him, he was a complete hero of mine. But by the time I met him, he was getting quite old, but he was still naughty. He was still, you know, but amazing. And Albert was like, you know, I mean, if it wasn't for Albert Finney, when I saw Albert Finney when I was 15. Now I always wanted to be an actor, but I never thought I could be a British actor. I always thought, well, I need to go to America. I would need to be an American, and I wasn't an American. I was a Scot. So it was a problem, because I thought movies was what I initially wanted to do, and I looked around and I thought, well, what, you know, there's no way, because I'm not a Kenneth More. I'm not a Dirk Bogarde. I haven't got that sort of Englishness about me. And then I saw a film called Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. And there on the screen was Albert Finney. And Albert's 10 years older than me. Sadly, he's not with us any longer. But I thought, wow, it's possible. If that guy can do it from his background in Salford, Manchester, I could certainly do it from my background in Dundee, Angus. So that was a great revelation to me. And it kind of helped me cross a relative insecurity in that way, of just, you know, another insecurity about, am I worthy? You know, am I worthy of doing what I'm doing? And it propelled me and said, no, you go to drama school, you can actually do it. You can actually become the actor that you would like to be. And I went into the theatre. I got a job in the theatre, and as I said, I was immediately welcomed. I had an extraordinary woman who came. I was asked, the guy who ran the theatre said, would you like to come to a voice class? And I didn't know what a voice class was. And this young woman, who sadly is no longer with us, called Kristen Linklater, was a genius voice teacher, she came, did this class, and I was completely transformed by it. And I thought, I've got to go where that woman is, where that woman teaches. I did, but sadly she left 6 weeks. She went to America 6 weeks after I arrived at the school. But I've always found people, particularly in my profession, incredibly open and welcoming. And that's meant a lot to me. And that's why I feel the theatre is my family.
There is a very honest admission in the book where it begins with the prologue, but you do keep explaining it in a couple of chapters, where you say that, you know, in theatre, you got the leading parts. You were the leading man. But in films, you were all right being a character actor. Did you find that liberating, being a character
Well,
actor?
once you know, we deal a lot. I mean, we deal a lot with our ego. Actors have to meet their ego on a regular basis, and sometimes your ego gets in the way, and you have sometimes, you know, if you know, you can get a little bit heady and a little bit grandiose if you're not very careful. I reasonably managed to avoid that. So I just felt that that it was necessary for me to do my job and be good at my job. And I did play leading characters, and as you say, in the theatre, I had a huge classical career. But I hadn't done what I wanted to do, which was I wanted to do movies. I'd done television, but I hadn't done movies. I've certainly made it up for it since. But I thought, I'm now going to shift. And I reached a point, this was in, God, nearly 30 years ago, where I decided I needed to move into a different direction. And I didn't have the ego of saying I'm all. I mean, I remember meeting Nigel Hawthorne on a plane, and he's saying I can't play those parts anymore. And I kept saying, but Nigel, we're actors. That's what we can do that. There's no shame in it. And of course, the result has been Logan Roy. You know, I would never have got Logan Roy if I hadn't done the work that I've done. And always, you know, a great friend of mine is, you know, it always said, follow your path, follow your bliss. Don't lose track of what you want. And it's not to do with acquiring something, it's being better at what you do. And the theatre gave me that. It gave me that in spades, and it really did. But, you know, I came to a point in the mid-90s where I sort of, because the British Isles are very small, and I still hadn't met my film destiny, and I felt I really got to go. So I thought, I'm going to go to the States. I'm not worried about being a leading actor. I mean, I found I had to find, I needed to find a way to approach supporting roles. But a lot of supporting roles, and my influence for supporting roles was a lot of American actors from the past, character actors you would never have even heard of. And I see their impact on movies. And I thought, you know, they are the ground rock on which the stars can do their work. But it's the character actors who really do the job. So I thought, right, I'm going to shift. I'm going to become this, you know, this character actor and just follow that path. And of course, you know, it's been amazing. And gradually, there are people's awareness of me in the cinema grew and grew and grew until it's become ridiculous.
Speaking of Logan Roy, you have, in your interviews, you've rejected any easy judgments on the character, maintaining that it's a very complex character for you to play. What did it take you to inhabit Logan Roy in succession?
Well, you just do the work. You know, you create the backstory, you create the history of the man. And I've said this before, and I keep saying, actors do not judge their characters. You know, I mean, you can, you know, a character can judge himself, and he can say, I'm this or I'm that, and I don't do this or I do that, and you know. But the actor, that's not the actor's job. The actor's job is to take the material, like paints in a palette, and you go this color, this color, this color. You create the character, you create who he is, and you create him from, in a way, his own point of view and the adversity that he has to put up with or she has to put up with in their lives, which makes for character. That's what character is. And once a great director once said to me, character is about contradiction. That you actually can, you know, when someone has characters, it's usually when they've contradicted themselves. And we all do tiny little contradictions on a daily basis. You know, I'm going to go and have this. I'm going to go and have this meal. Oh, I don't like pasta. Okay, well, I'll try pasta. Oh no, pasta's fine. So that you've included that in your diet. But you know, where you had a resistance to something, but by making a bridge to something, you kind of inhabit it in a way. And that's what actors do. We do it on a daily working basis, you know.
You've also written at length about how you were offered Robert Baratheon's character in Game of Thrones and Harry Potter. And
no, I wasn't. I was never offered Harry Potter.
Okay, yeah. So
never.
But
I was offered that part. Yeah.
The most captivating part in those passages is where you honestly admit that, you know, that at this stage of your career, you need something which will go on for a couple of seasons. And Robert Baratheon was supposed to be, you know, killed off in the first season. So you didn't think that was a character that would.
Yeah, I mean, there were other reasons. It wasn't. I mean, the character was good. I thought it was an interesting character, but it was also something that was very much at the. I mean, there was there were other things that came around which were more that I felt I had more distance with. And I just felt that it was the early days of Game of Thrones. I thought it was a very good idea. And I certainly would have liked to have been involved in Game of Thrones, but on a much, as you say, on a much longer basis. But that's not just to do with the fact that, that's also to do with developing a character over a period of time, which is what the great joy of playing Logan Roy is, and whereas when a character's cut off, that's the end of him. You go, well, he inhabits that short space. And I just I wasn't particularly up to that. And also, one also has to think about how you're going to be paid for the part as well.
Yeah. That is another thing, sir, that I really like about your book, the candor with which you talk about acting in Match Point and the wonderful experience of working with Woody Allen. But at the same time, you talk about it doesn't pay. Because what happens is sometimes actors can live in a very fantastical universe where the craft, uh, takes precedence over pay and everything.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an unreal place, but
Yeah, well, the point is that you never go into this money. You never go into this profession to earn money. That would be, you choose another profession, but don't think you're going to make any money. The whole theatre experience, the whole business of being in the theatre as an actor or being in the cinema as an actor is that there are no guarantees, and you live in human beings tend to live with certain guarantees. I'm going to be doing this job for 30 years. I'll be doing this job I'll be in this business for that. The actors don't do that. They change on a daily basis. They're shifting all the time. And of course that creates a sort of, that would seem to be insecure, but it's our bread and butter insecurity. That's how we live. So, why would one settle for something? But occasionally you want to go, I want to explore that for a time, like somebody like Logan Roy. I mean, it's, because I have a very strong affection for Logan Roy. I mean, I think he's completely screwed up as a man, but I do, there's something about him that is mysterious. And that's the other thing for me, which is interesting about my job, is creating the mystery, the human mystery of who somebody is. Because you think, oh, it's this person, and it goes, oh, that, why? And as I say, a great man once said to me, character is in contradiction, and that's the key.
In the course of your book, you express your disapproval, if I may use the word, of method acting. And there is a particularly funny passage where you talk about Daniel Day-Lewis in The Boxer.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of veteran actors echo your sentiments. So what is it about that immersive experience of method acting that you disapprove of?
Well, I think it's the thing about acting, and this is where certain actors forget, it's a group activity. It's not just about you. It's about you in relationship to your fellow actors. So there has to be a sense of responsibility to the unit, the ensemble. You play your role, but there's also the ensemble. And if you play your role outside the ensemble, it's no longer an ensemble. It's no longer a totality in itself. So I'm very keen on the fact that when you're part of something, you're part of it. You become a family, and you have a certain responsibility to the family idea, to the overall connection, apart from pursuing your own furrow, plowing your own furrow as an actor. Now that's a different discipline, but it's very important to understand where you are in relationship to your fellow actors at the same time, and that is sometimes what the method encourages. Sometimes a selfishness, which I think can be very counterproductive. Now, Dan Day-Lewis is a genius actor. There's no question about Dan, and his commitment is total. And he actually is great. I mean, he's a lovely man, actually, Dan, and he doesn't go down that road. He's very, very inclusive in that way. But some young American actors get so obsessed, with something that they can't see the wood for the trees. you know. And I find that it's, we have a, you know, we play our role, but we have a responsibility to the whole of what we do, you know, and that is in danger of getting sidelined. Now, there's a great book called The Method or How I Learned to Act by Isaac Butler, which deals with this very thing that I'm talking about in much more breadth and detail than I can in this conversation. And it's a book I'd recommend any actor to read because it's about the debate. You know, there's this famous story of the American group theater, who was kind of social-based theater, and it was during the 30s. And it had people like Elia Kazan, you know, Stella Adler, Clifford Odets. There was an amazing movement of people, and they were very influenced by which Stanislavski. He never called it the method; he always called it the system. You know, the system of work, and it was basically. And Stanislavski's work was based on ideas that he picked up from older actors. How do you work? What do you do? How do you prepare? How do you make your role happen? And he put that into a sort of cohesiveness and a form of teaching. And that's what he used to do with his students. And at the end of the day, he was more interested in exploring that than directing plays, which was, you know, how he developed. So that was the thing. And Stella Adler, there was this thing called emotional memory or affective memory, which is where you call upon the memory of a child, you call upon your own personal memory to engage in something. And Stella Adler was very questioning of this. And she went and tracked down Stanislavski in Paris in the mid-30s. He happened to be there at the Bois de Boulogne, of all places. And she asked him, she said, Maestro, so what about affective and emotional memory? And he said, oh, no. He said, I got rid of that. He said, because it interferes with the imagination. And I think that that's very accurate about the method system, is that the imagination sometimes gets sidelined. Not always, but that's what he felt. I'm not totally in agreement with him, but I can understand what he meant. So she goes back to the group and she meets Lee Strasberg, who's one of the leaders of the group. And she said, you know, Stanislavski doesn't believe in, you know, he believes it's a tool, but he doesn't believe it's the main modus operandi for acting. And Strasberg said, well, then Stanislavski's wrong. So he took the method and he took it on to somewhere else. And, you know, he's certainly influenced so many actors. Not as many as, you know, they said he was a great influence to Marlon Brando, but he wasn't. Stella Adler was Brando's teacher, and Brando was very much his own man on that way, as is Robert De Niro in that way. And now they can use elements of method, but it's not the be all and the end all. And actually some actors would say when they're doing what I think is method, they're not doing method at all. So there's a debate about that as well. But it's just that when you're part of a family, you have your own, you just think about it, you have your own individuality and your own sense, but you also have familial responsibility within a family, you know. And certainly creatively, you have to have that familial responsibility because you're doing it together. You're all out there together. You're in the front line together. You're like soldiers in that way. And this goes also for, you know, men and women alike.
That's very well explained. Now, coming to Shakespeare, you have uh, played Titus Andronicus, for which you won Olivier Award. Richard III, you've played Orlando in As You Like It. Would you say that performing Shakespeare on stage is a rite of passage for an actor?
Well, I think so. Because Shakespeare is, I mean, he's the Mozart of the theatre world. His work is astonishing. And Shakespeare, I mean, if you want to talk about acting, Shakespeare has, when he gives Hamlet's advice to the players, he talks about what the role of the actor is and what the discipline of the actor is. And that hasn't changed in 600 years. It simply hasn't changed at all. And I think that Shakespeare, and the way the writing, the use of the iambic pentameter, which is as close to speech, you know, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely. You know, it's all part of, it's based on natural speech. So he's also poetic, but he also brilliantly uses prose. Sometimes, like there's a wonderful scene in Hamlet where Hamlet meets Ophelia, and he's just done the famous "to be or not to be" speech, which is probably the most poetic speech in the language. And Ophelia comes on, and she says her lines: "My honored lord, I have remembrances of yours. I have longed long to redeliver." And he comes in, and she does it in this, in the rhythm of iambic. Now Hamlet, because he feels there's something unnatural about her speech, that it's so do 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 do, he thinks, what's going on? So he goes into prose, and he starts trying to pull her away from the verse, and she tries to try and pull him back to the verse. And so that's the tension in the scene. And once you understand that, you know how to play the scene. That Hamlet is going wild, and she's saying, "Oh my God, this is, I have to keep, oh what," and then at the end she goes, "Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown, the soldiers call us," and so it's rhythmical. It's so boom, 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 because she is so stuck in her society, and that's the genius of Shakespeare. That's what he does. In a simple scene, he explains everything. He explains status. He explains where she is. He explains where Hamlet is and the kind of wildness of his thinking. And just the best writer ever. I mean, to me, he's the greatest, you know, certainly in the English language.
Though you're also a fan of Henrik Ibsen.
I am. I love Ibsen. Yeah, I do. Because he does. Ibsen was the first really social thinking writer. You know, he deals with social issues, particularly also, I mean, amazing writer for women. Doll's House, which is so ahead of its time, and is constantly being done and done again. You know, and I've done a lot of Shakespeare, a lot of Ibsen's plays.
Yeah. You know, from the child who would collect batter bits for dinner to now you have come a long way. How has your relationship with fame changed over the years, ever since you joined movies?
It's funny. I've always managed to. I've always prided myself on that people going, "You're the guy, are you, or were you in that?" Or that people have never always been able to sort of go, "Oh," and they, "Oh, you were in that. Oh, of course you were, yeah." So I've always kind of bobbed and weaved in that way. That's gone now because of Logan Roy. I mean, it's just gone. I mean, everybody knows who Logan Roy is, you know. So so I've lost my anonymity. And I thrive myself on my anonymity. You know, I just like the fact that people don't quite know who I am. But now that's gone, and I've just had to let it go, which is sad in a way, but that's the way it is.
In the post-pandemic world, we are observing that audiences are returning to the theater for more, to cinema theaters for more spectacle-driven films. You know, like the biggest blockbusters of last year, and I'm talking purely in terms of cinema over here, the biggest blockbusters are Avatar, Top Gun Maverick, Marvel Cinematic Universe. Do you think story and storytelling is in danger of being sacrificed at the altar of spectacle?
I think that's very well put, if I may say so. And I think there is an element of that. I mean, it will always survive. It will always go on. And also, we are fashion's fools. You know, we follow the fashion, and there's a fashion for these films. I personally, you know, I've done my share of those films. I did X-Men, but what I liked about X-Men was it was allegorical, you know, about people who are excluded. So if you can understand the allegorical nature, then you understand the purpose, and you go, I see what this means. I see what this is about, you know. And I think Brian Singer directing X-Men 2 was brilliant in that way, because it was an allegorical statement about outsiders, you know, about people who are outside. Now that's told like a myth. It's told in a pattern, in a shape. The problem is it sort of becomes a thing in itself, and when it stops relating to who we are as human beings, then I find it a little problematic when it's just all about your superpowers, you know. I mean, there are wonderful ideas. I mean, what I think are turning on its head is there's a very good series called, which is quite hard sometimes, called The Boys. It's a TV series called The Boys, which is turning the superheroes are not all good. They're powers of, so again, allegorically, that works incredibly well. So there's a real responsibility in what that show does, and it's very impressive in a way. And sometimes it's a bit hard to take because it can be quite tough. I think the problem is when you're representing the sort of effect of it rather than the great writers write in terms of how there's a layer of writing which is to the top, and then there's so much underneath that propels a story or an idea, you know. And I think that sometimes in blockbusters becomes sacrificed. That's why I like stories about human beings. You know, I'm not interested in superheroes. I'm interested in people who are struggling on a day-to-day basis. And I think particularly now, certainly in light of what we've been through the pandemic, but also one of my great concerns, and I've just done a documentary on it called How the Other Half Live. And this is because, you know, I was thinking, doing Logan Roy and playing one of the richest men in the world, and I thought, what's the corollary? What's the corollary to that? What is that about? Well, it's about money. It's essentially about money. So I thought I want to do, and then somebody came here to where I am now. This was 3 years ago, and said, I want to do a documentary on money. And I immediately went, yes, that's important. So we did these two things called How the Other Half Live. And it's the separation of wealth, you know, the wealth gap, you know, people who are wholly so wealthy and people who have nothing. And of course, that gap is getting wider and wider and wider. And the poorer people are being more and more sacrificed to greed. And I think we're in a very, very precarious state that way. So I wanted to do that because I wanted to explore, and it was a very tough subject to do because I had to go back to my hometown, which still has a state of poverty. You know, examples, for instance, when I was a kid, when I was a child, we had a backyard which we shared with 3 other tenements. You know, it was enclosed, quite big, had an area shelter in it, and it had beautiful gardens, and it had these tall poles where you hung washing out, and the washing, everybody hung their washing, you know, their clothes, laundry out on these poles, and with what do you call them? The things with the ropes where you put the pins in and you wheel it out, and that was so wonderful. And the other thing is that people in their individual flats had their name on the door. Well, now when I went back, the poles are there, but there's no washing. And there are no names on the doors, only numbers. So we're in danger of depersonalizing poverty, where we go, oh, well, poverty is part of it. That's, we just have to live with it. And of course we have to live with it. But the point is, we cease to do anything about it. And we cease to, you know, people are living, you know, when I look back at my childhood, we had a blissful time with, you know, we all were in it together. But now society is being separated out. And that's my concern. That's more and more my concern. And that's why I wanted to do this program, because again, it was the corollary to being Logan Roy and playing the richest man in the world, this rather brutal fella, you know. So that, as an artist, is very important to me, that I create the balance. And also, and of course, Succession is a satire. It's a comment on how we live as well. It's exactly about how, you know, entitlement goes hand in hand with wealth, and people forget. I mean, like these children. I mean, they're so entitled. Logan's kids, you know, that they have no sense of the world. And Logan, and that's the great thing about Logan, is he's come through all that. He's made probably the wrong decisions, but he's come through that, through his own poverty, through his own, and you see it, and that's the genius of the writers. It's never explained. He goes swimming, and you see these scars on his back. Never explained, but you realize that this man has been brutalized at some time in his life. And so his position is so different from his children. And that's also, you know, and everybody goes on, oh, it's the Murdochs, isn't it? And you go, no, it's not the Murdochs, it's the Roys. Because Logan Roy is a self-made man. He didn't inherit anything. Nothing came to him. He got it all himself. But it's also made him misanthropic as a result.
You have a candor about you that is at odds with the culture of political correctness that has
I hate
emerged.
political correctness. I really do. I think, and I hate woke culture, and I hate cancel culture. I think, you know, I'm not a Christian, but I think it's said very well when it's said in the Bible, by Christ, I think says it, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And this is, you know, this is leading to what cancel culture is leading to a sort of modern form of McCarthyism. You know, and it's the young people who are doing it a lot, which I find, you know, where they want to you can't say that. I mean, I stood up for what's the name the other day? Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling the other day, and I don't know J.K. Rowling, but everybody's kind of turned on her, and I go, well, a woman is entitled to say what she feels about her own body. Why can't she have an opinion on what she feels about what she is as a woman? You know, that's fair enough. It's, you know, you can disagree with it, but you can't suddenly turn on somebody and say, you can't say that, you know. And I think it's dangerous and it's irresponsible. And it's also, what is really deeply wrong about cancel culture? It's so unthinking. It has so unthinking and unconsiderate. And it's stupid. Deeply, deeply stupid. And it confirms people in their stupidity. And it encourages stupidness, you know, the easy common denominator. And that's why I can't stand it. And the woke thing is exactly the same. You know, because it's hypocritical. I'll give you an example. I go to a Me Too meeting conducted by Ronan Farrow, and it was hosted by Rosanna Arquette, the actress Rosanna, who's a great friend of mine. And it was at the time of the Golden Globes a couple of years ago, and Rosanna said, well, I've got, what's his name, Ronan Farrow coming. Do you want to come this afternoon? Because there's a whole bunch of people coming. So I went there, and he was incredible, you know, listening to this man talking, and I was very impressed. And, you know, and the women were very intense. And, you know, and he was saying, you know, some really, you know, his writing is pretty powerful. And he's a very good writer. So, but at the end of the meeting, the meeting broke up, and all these women turned around. And I was standing at the back. I arrived late, so I'm standing at the back like this. And all these women, they get out, and they immediately get out their devices and come up to me and go, I won't say it, but they say, can you tell us to, you know what? And I'm going, this is ridiculous. This is a Me Too meeting. And you're turning to a white dinosaur, and you're asking them to do that. I mean, this doesn't compute what's going on, you know, from what you've just heard to what you're asking me to do. And of course, I mean, I laugh at that. I think that's delightful because I think that's human nature, because we don't know where we are. We're so confused. Human beings live in a permanent state of deep confusion. And it's even more confusing being alive now than it's ever been. And it gets more confusing. And then when we see retrograde things like what's been happening in the Ukraine and this, you know, and you just go, when are we learning? When are we going to actually wake up and say, this doesn't work? We have to move on. You know, the world is too small. We're destroying the planet. Let's move to something else, you know?
Thank you so much for your time. We are looking forward to having your session at the Emirates Lip Fest.
Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you.